I looked around everywhere trying to find a knife or something. I mean, I looked at the axe. I had a chop axe, chopped on it. I mean, there's no way I could touch her with it. Not that case or with anything like that. I just couldn't do it. So I looked up and I see this knife sticking out. It got like two prongs on the end, two sharp points comes out on the end of him, and then it got big serrated edges all along it. You saw blocks of ice with it. And I got that, and I tried it with the big ones first, and it was terrible. It was I'm sweating. I'm just about everything that went on this time. So I finally managed to do it, to take her head off, and then her legs, and it was unbearable.
Police in Gloucester, searching 25 Cromwell Street, last night discovered yet a further set of human remains.
A builder, Frederick West, has been charged with their murders.
We know that she was either 16 or 17 when she went missing, but apart from that, we've got very little information.
She said that Ella was cut up. Well, I never felt so ill in all my life for a few minutes before I could get a grip of myself again. And I said, what on earth did you cut her up for? She said she wouldn't fit in a dustbin.
Over the next 6 years, the Wests tortured and killed 5 more girls in the cellar of their home.
Detectives say there's a distinct possibility there may be more bodies.
The girls had fallen prey to the Wests as they cruised the area in a search for victims.
Their police recovered 9 bodies, all of them women.
It was a harrowing hour for the 9 relatives who attended the inquest. Some were in tears as they listened to the horrifying evidence.
Clues to the disappearance of Heather West were lying beneath the paving stone.
Take one.
Frederick West was born in Muchmarkle, a small village on the borders of Gloucestershire and Herefordshire. His father was called Walter. His father was basically a labourer, an agricultural worker. It was a very primitive house. Well, Fred was introduced to sex by his mother in their cottage. She had a habit of what she used to call breaking in her boys, which is a habit that West himself adopted when it came to his daughters. It was a family trait. People like to think of it as somehow abhorrent and abnormal. But to Frederick West, it was absolutely what the family always did. His dad had done it, his mum initiated into sex at the age, I think, of 8, first time. And it's a cramped house. They would hang a pig in the kitchen to let the blood drain out onto the floor so they could butcher it. It was red in tooth and claw.
Good evening. Rosemary West, on trial at Winchester, accused of 10 murders, today became the first witness called in her own defence. Her counsel told the court she knew nothing about and took no part in any of the killings.
Rose was a child who would bash her head against the cot and the wall and keep all her siblings awake at night. While Rose's mother was pregnant, she was very, very depressed, and it's not surprising because she was having to put up with this awful violence in the home. And her husband would put salt in the food and fat in the cooker to stop being able to eat, stop the family being able to eat.
Daisy Letts was depressed, I think, partly by her husband's attitude to her and the children, and also because she couldn't cope. She had electroconvulsive therapy at one point, certainly when she was carrying Rosemary, and that might have had an impact on Rose, but I suspect it didn't. Rosemary West was born in North Devon, Barnstaple. She was a slightly chubby child. a little nervous, not very bright. She was known at school as Dozy Rosie. Her father was Bill Letts. Her maiden name was Letts. Bill Letts was a monster.
Rose was believed to have been raped by her father when she was 14, 15. Imagine your father coming home and going upstairs and, sexually abusing you at any opportunity when they can get you on your own.
But what she did develop was a skill with coping with an sexually abusive father. And she used her sex very early on, from a very early age.
She was growing up with watching all the violence around the home as if that was normal. And so when she had her own children, you see her start to emulate that behaviour herself.
10 murder victims now, and still the investigation goes on in a field
near where Catherine Costello's remains were found, and at Cromwell Street, where today they were preparing to demolish an extension before beginning a final search there.
Fred West's life before meeting Rose had been one of violence, sex abuse and murder.
I don't wish to sound flippant, but West, of course, inevitably attacks one of his sisters, then rapes her. This reaches the ears of the authorities, and West is taken to court. But of course his sister, in the end, doesn't press charges, refuses to give evidence, and the case collapses. Very signal moment in Frederick West's life, because he believed, and pretty much did, get away with anything. After all, you can rape your own sister and not suffer for it. I'm bulletproof.
And he would see sex abuse from his father. He'd see him abusing girls in the field. Fred would have to have sex with his mother when he was 12. Horrendous. Fred basically grew up with sex all around him, and sex addiction was, I would think, a fairly natural consequence.
News just in. The serial killer duo, Fred and Rose West, have struck again. A further 2 remains have been found hidden on Cromwell Street, totaling the number of victims to 12. Police will continue to search 25 Cromwell Street and the surrounding area in search of more remains. The bodies were reported to have been tied up, stripped down, dismembered and mutilated at the time of discovery. Authorities claim they haven't come across a UK case like this since Jack the Ripper. This small town in Gloucestershire is now front page news all across Great Britain.
Rose and Fred first met at Cheltenham bus station. This man in a Mac came shuffling over. I think he had some problem with his leg. And she said he had very ganky teeth, he looked scruffy, but very quickly he made her laugh.
Now, West had an appetite for very, very young women, as would become clear as the years passed. And he took a fancy to Rose. Rose thought he was really disgusting. Well, he was very smelly. But he had an incredible charm. He was always filthy. His hands were always caked in mud. and he rarely changed his clothes. He had this very sort of curly hair, but he had the most extraordinary neuro-linguistic skill. And literally, he could charm the birds off the trees. And he would begin, and he would suddenly start talking, as if to draw you into this world that he inhabited. Initially, I think she was reluctant, but there was something about West, not for a moment forgiving his multiple sins and the murders, but he had this extraordinary charm. If you talk to his neighbours, for example, they always said what a cheery little chap he was. He'd always come round and help with your car, or your radios didn't work, or you want something doing, don't worry, I'll pop in, I'll fix it. And Rose was just sucked into this world which West had created. And she quickly, and I do mean quickly, became his partner.
They had so much in common. Rose and Fred had so much in common. So both had been sexually abused in childhood, both had grown up with that as the norm and seeing violence around them. Both had mothers called Daisy. It was very soon a full-on romance between them.
Now, West had a sort of system, if you like. West himself had got married to a former prostitute, Rena Costello, who came from Glasgow. And she gave birth to a child that wasn't West's, called Charmaine, always said to be the daughter of a Pakistani bus driver in Glasgow. And then they had a daughter together, Anna Marie, West and Rena. And so West would try and entice a young woman, originally a girl called Anna McFall, and then later Rose, to become, quotes, nanny to the children.
She was still very young and quite babyish herself. She wore schoolgirl socks, which she continued to wear up until the day she went to court. She had a very high babyish voice, and then she was happy to take these little children out and show them the wildflowers and play with them.
It was really an excuse to have another person to have sexual relations with. I mean, West was rapacious, almost as rapacious as her father, William Letts. And there was initially a confrontation between West and William Letts over Rose, and it wasn't just about over Rose, the 15-year-old. It was over who had the sexual rights to Rose. In the end, West being West, was a very shrewd, and he made Letts his partner rather than his competitor for Rose. So Rose first leaves home, leaves Bill Letts and her mother Daisy, and moves in with West, who at that point had two caravans in caravan sites quite near where the Letts were living, as, quotes, the nanny. And that's how it all began.
The mass murderer Rosemary West was moved to the top security jail in Durham today to begin her life sentence behind bars. The jail already houses the Moors murderer Myra Hindley. ITN's Robert Hall reports on the sort of life Mrs. West can expect and on today's other developments in the West case.
I am working out what I'm going to tell the police, how I'm going to handle it. Right? One body, fully clothed, or I thought at the first place, but no, by now I know it's cut up, so I have to make you think out why the bloody hell did I cut her up? I mean, what reason for that? Did I cut this girl up? That's why I said, well, at least it's only one. I said, so, you know, I mean, you could accidentally kill one, but I mean, I wouldn't get away with accidentally killing two, like, sort of thing. That's the thought was going through my mind, like. So I said, well, is that it? Oh, no, she said, oh, I don't know, it was 7 or 8 knives. You know. So anyway, Rose told me where the ones in the basement was. I said to Rose, I said, well, fuck me, I'm done bad of it. I said, that's fucking... You know, I've got a fucking enough here, aren't you?
I'm Dr. Peter Hughes. I'm a writer, psychologist, a philosopher, and I specialise in the darker side of human behaviour. Fred West was a compulsive and obsessive consumer of pornography, prostitution. He was also a sexual sadist. And what that points to is something that's universal in the minds of serial killers, which is an obsession to control other human beings. And through that control, to degrade them, to demonstrate the power that they have, their own sense of entitlement to use human beings simply as tools of their own self-gratification. And of course, pornography, prostitution and sadism bear witness to those qualities in abundance in the life and in the mind of Fred West. Fred West was a builder, and in 1972 they moved from Midland Road in Gloucester to what became their most famous address, which was Cromwell Street. And Fred, being a builder, made alterations to the house, and so they could take in lodgers. And of course, Fred West, being a psychopath, had only one intention really in taking in lodgers. Ostensibly it was, of course, to supplement his income, but of course once they moved into his world and into his physical space and into his home, his compulsion and his need to control and to use those lodgers for his own gratification came to the fore.
Whilst welcoming the public response, senior officers are stressing tonight that until they have firm and reliable evidence, no search operations will begin.
Fred, it's difficult, I think, for most people to comprehend, but Fred was not jealous sexually. He was quite happy to share Rose with whoever else might want to make love to her. And that included, in the beginning, some of the male lodgers that he took into 25 Cromwell Street. But they also, Fred had not given up his habit of trying to find nannies to look after the children. And the first real example of that when they were in Cromwell Street was they invited a girl whom they'd met. Believe it or not, they picked her up at a bus stop and given her a lift. She lived in the Forest of Dean, not far away. And she was young, impressionable, so they offered her a job as the nanny. Well, Anne McFall had been a nanny, Rose had been a nanny to some extent, so she gets offered this job. But it quickly becomes clear that there's a bit more to this job than might have met the eye. In particular, she'd have to have sex with Fred and possibly with Rose as well.
So Caroline Roberts lived in the Forest of Dean, and she was one of 15 children. She was picked up one night by Fred and Rose, who were out looking to pick up lemons, as Fred called them. Young girls that they could take home and lure them with the children being at home that they had by then, and then get them into their sex games and then into what Fred had prepared the cellar for, which was murder, torture and murder.
So she decides to leave. Well, she leaves, but then they go and fetch her back again.
And they knew where Caroline would be, what time she'd be there, from having picked her up before. So they picked her up, said, "Oh, where have you been? You know, we've missed you, the children missed you." But Caroline was nervous at first about getting in. But once she'd got in the car and accepted this lift home, and she thought, they're not going to do any harm, they didn't the first time, you know. Immediately, they made her climb into the back. Rose climbed into the back and started sexually abusing her, assaulting her. And Caroline pushed her off, trying to stop her. And Fred just turned round, like pursed his lips and took a punch at Caroline.
They keep a victim, they keep a prisoner for 36 hours, during which time they rape her, abuse her, both of them, not just Fred. Rose by this time is the apprentice. They tie her up, they do all kinds of unimaginable things to her. And in the end, she realises the only way she can possibly escape is by pretending to go along with the scheme. So after an absolutely horrific night and early morning, of abuse, she persuades them that they don't need to tie her up all the time. And it sounds almost mundane, but Rose goes to the laundrette round the corner. When Rose is out, she runs for it, and indeed gets away. And this is the first time that Fred and Rose really encounter the authorities in Gloucester.
I have reason to believe that there may be other remains in the area, but I am not in this position at this time to explain that further.
The latest remains haven't yet been identified, but relatives of 2 missing people from Gloucestershire have been told about what the search team has unearthed.
They go to trial. Well, it's really a he said, she said argument. And of course, Fred and Rose, being 2 of them, and by this time, of course, married with children, say no, nothing, was all consensual. We don't, some people like rough sex. So what's and in fact, they get away with it. They get away with a fine. Had more attention been paid at that first sexual assault, many of the things that were to come later would possibly have been prevented. At various times, she tried to break away a little from West's spell, but it was difficult to do. He was incredibly persuasive. And also, he pimped her out to a lot of the locals in Gloucester. I mean, Fred and Rose had this thing about black men, and Rose particularly liked black men. And I think 3 of the children were actually by her clients. She operated as a prostitute in the first floor of Cromwell Street and had a room specially done up to do that. It was a collaboration in every way. She wasn't persuaded, bullied, cajoled into it. She participated willingly. And I'm one of the few people who's ever seen some of the home videos that Fred took of Rose. And once you've seen those videos of Rose doing the most extraordinary things to herself, with Fred sometimes peeping into the shot and then retiring behind the camera, you know perfectly well that she was a participant in every way. She knew exactly what was happening, and she agreed to it. I'm afraid I don't see Rosemary West as a hapless victim in any way.
Rose was an active and a willing participant in the crimes committed against her daughter Anne-Marie. She colluded and encouraged Fred to rape Anne-Marie. She made Anne-Marie do household chores, naked, degraded, sometimes wearing nothing but a miniskirt and some sexual appendages. And at 13, she sent Anne-Marie out to work as a prostitute. And Anne-Marie would bring some of the clients back, and Rose would watch to make sure that Anne-Marie, who pretended to be 16, didn't actually tell them that her real age was just 13. And this is extraordinary behaviour on the part of someone to whom their child has been, into whose care this child has been entrusted. And it just goes to show how far removed from normal pathology the serial killer's psychology is.
If you look at the statements of the witnesses at her trial, the 3 or 4 that got away, you can see quite clearly she becomes even more crueler than Fred.
I mean, at one point they were, I think, taken to court, and an audio tape was played of Fred and Rose making love in the back of the van he had at that time. And this was played to the court, and of course they said it's perfectly normal, why shouldn't we? It was that. The psychiatrist later came to call it folie à deux. The 2 of them were more dangerous than one of them on their own. Somehow, the 2 of them became a worse, a darker force when they were together.
Here, Miss Owens claims she was subjected to further serious sexual assaults, including being beaten with a leather belt. She told the court, "I was scared to death. I didn't think I'd be going home again." In the morning, she said Fred West had threatened to shut her in the cellar or bury her under the paving stones of Gloucester, adding, "There are hundreds of girls there already." She had agreed to stay with them, but had escaped to tell her tale.
Rose West understood what sexual abuse was. She had undergone it herself. She had a violent, sexually abusive father. She knew what sexual abuse was, but it didn't stop her from doing it and from repeating the pattern. And psychologists have a number of different ideas about why this is the case. Sometimes the wounded subject can repeat the violence that caused the wound in the hope of healing it. In other instances, they simply identify with a sadistic aggressor and then repeat that sadism and get gratification from it. So the fact that one is a victim of violent or sexual abuse doesn't mean one is immune from conducting that abuse oneself. And sometimes it can actually be a compulsion to repeat that pattern.
One example of Fred's tradition of taking advantage of, sexually abusing his daughters was his attack on Anna Marie, who was Rena's daughter with Fred, in fact his firstborn child. And Fred and Rose take her to the cellar in Cromwell Street and subject her to the most ferocious sexual attack.
Rose would strip Anne-Marie naked and gag her and tie her to either the bed frame or a mattress, and while Fred raped her.
Bones were always missing, whether they were taken before or after. Most were taken after, but you don't know what actually happened. There was a hook.
And she would explain to Anne-Marie, after the degradation was complete, that what Fred was doing was just a father's job, and it was completely normal and it was completely acceptable, and that she must not say anything to anyone, which of course is the perpetual exhortation of the psychopath and the serial killer to their victims, especially when those victims are young and vulnerable, and they, by intent of the serial killer, in this instance, survive the ordeal. Do not say a word to anyone.
It has a catastrophic effect on her personality, there's no question of that. And she became intensely troubled, went through various periods separated from the family and then returning to them. To this day, she's really troubled. But that brutal attack in the cellar was really a foreshadowing of what they would later come to do with the other victims that found themselves in the cellar at Cromwell Street.
Fred and Rose committed the most heinous crimes.
There's no doubt in my mind that Rose was the sorcerer's apprentice. Fred was the truly evil man. She became a truly wicked woman.
Stripped them, tied them up. One ended up scalped, beheaded, nails removed.
They would have bones removed so they couldn't run. In particular, Fred was keen on taking out kneecaps. It still sends a shiver down my spine for what happened to those poor girls in Cromwell Street.
We now know that the girls had fallen prey to the Wests as they cruised the area in a search for victims. They'd even bragged to friends about their carefully laid plans.
She said, when he's got a woman companion with him, it makes it easier for the victim if they go and pick up a girl. Because Rose is with them, she doesn't hesitate to say no because there's a woman and a bloke in a van.
Rosemary West has spent her first...
In Gloucester and throughout the country, the headlines have charted every detail of the horror. A first opportunity to tell the story in full.
Of course, the serial killer's compulsion to control has its limits. Eventually they might make a mistake, or the world catches up with them.
But the signature killing, the one that in the end was to bring this murderous scheme to an end, and in the end West killed, well, not just Anne McFall, his first wife Rena, but another 10 people, including, of course, Charmaine, Rena's daughter, by the Pakistani bus driver. It was the murder of Heather. Heather was Rose's firstborn child with Fred. She was very dark-haired, really quite striking. Rose didn't really get on with Heather terribly well, because Heather and May, which was the next daughter along in the list of West's children, there was a son, Stephen, in between them, but it was Heather, Stephen and May. And May and Heather developed a pact that they would never allow themselves to be alone with Fred. So, for example, if they went to have a bath or a shower, one would stand outside the door, and then they'd swap places. Well, this aggravated Fred, because he believed his daughters were his right, and it made him really, really angry. Worse, I think, is that I think Heather told him, she was 16, she was bright, she was determined. I think she told him, I'm gonna tell the police about what you do to your children. And I think that was the final straw that made West decide to kill her.
Breaking news. Fred West has confessed to strangling his daughter Heather in a fit of rage, then dismembering her body in the ground floor bathroom with a heavy serrated knife he normally used for cutting slabs of frozen meat. Her remains had been stored in a dustbin as he waited for an opportunity to dig her grave. Fred was insistent his wife had no knowledge of her daughter's murder.
Anyway, they invent this incredible story that she's gone off, she's become a drug dealer, and then she's gone to the Middle East, and well, all we know was that she disappeared at the age of 16. Out of the blue, where's she gone? Nobody knew. But it took an awfully long time for the pennies to drop that actually something must have happened to Heather.
The West's youngest child, Heather, hadn't been seen since 1987. And the West's other children, once they'd been taken into care, they, of course, began to tell the stories. And the truth began to drip out, and social workers became alarmed. And one of the things that the children said was that their parents used to say to them, if you don't behave well, you will end up under the patio
like Heather. Fred had paved the garden. He was very house proud, and he paved it rather elegantly with square tiles. And they used to say, the Heathers at 2 down and 3 across. It was a family joke. But then, the children were playing in Cromwell Street, and believe it or not, they encountered an old-fashioned police constable with a bicycle. And they say to him, what would you do if one of your daughters was attacked by your father? What would you do? And he says, what? No. Well, at that point, it becomes clear that all is not exactly regular at number 25 Cromwell Street. And the social services, Gloucester Social Services, intervene and remove 5 of the children.
But this eventually led to questioning what had happened to their first child, Heather, who hadn't been seen. And this is the door that opened to the conviction and the exposure of the atrocious crimes of Fred and Rose West.
Certainly the biggest story since I've been here in 33 years, and it goes on, and it looks as if it's going to persist even further. I suppose it's the biggest thing that's hit Gloucester since the siege in 1643.
No one's in any doubt that long shadows have been cast over Gloucester by the Rosemary West trial and the murders at Cromwell Street.
Constable Savage persuades her betters at Gloucester Constabulary, most of whom knew West relatively well. Many of them used him as sort of minor informant. If he received stolen goods, he would usually ring up one of the guys, one of the detectives in Gloucester, and say, "Oh, I've got this." He boasted about it in court at one point. And they didn't take West very seriously at all. He was just a bit of a grubby old, he might be a bit dodgy, but he's certainly not a killer. But Hazel Savage was convinced he was. And in fact, she was convinced that he probably killed his daughter Heather. So she persuades them to issue a warrant to search the house, and more particularly the garden, for Heather's remains. Because she too has heard the family joke that Heather's 2 up and 3 across all.
In the heart of Gloucester, one 3-storey terraced home has become the focal point of the city's biggest ever criminal investigation. Beneath the yellow tarpaulin, forensic teams have unearthed 3 sets of human remains. This is their 6th night excavating underneath a stone patio which covered the garden.
The remains of 2 further people were found in separate locations in the garden area of that address. At this time, for the most part, inquiries are continuing outside of the county, and it's believed that these people were alive until at least 1978.
Detectives believe the solution to an 8-year mystery may be buried in the back garden of this terraced house in Gloucester. It belongs to a couple whose daughter vanished in 1986, but no one ever reported that Heather West had disappeared, and this is proving an obstacle to the investigation.
We know that she was either 16 or 17 when she went missing, but apart from that, we've got very little information. There are no photographs of her that we're aware of, and so details about her are very sketchy.
Eventually, police did dig the garden up and found 3 femurs, so they knew straight away that it was more Heather was in the garden, and then everything was dug up.
The search for body number 4 has switched to inside the house. Out of sight but clearly audible, a pneumatic drill pounds away at the concrete floor. Police are concentrating the search in the cellar area. This follows a day's scanning using imaging technology.
And this led to further police investigations, and eventually some human hair and a bone was found under the patio at the West's home.
A fascination with horror seems an inescapable facet of human nature, and the trial of Rosemary West is an international story. These young Germans had put 25 Cromwell Street on their tourist route of Gloucester, treating it like any other attraction. And today, more visitors to what the local paper calls the House of Horror. Royale Robinson, whose daughter Shirley Ann was found in the garden along with her unborn child. Mr. Robinson now lives in Germany and had flown back with a documentary team to visit the place where she was killed by Frederick and Rosemary West. But the press are already working on finding the next 25 Cromwell Street. This time it's a car park in Gloucester, which it's claimed is the resting place of further victims. The speculation points to 16 others.
Body's that way, head's this way.
The police, while happy to give the media interviews with those officers who are involved in the investigation, are not quite so keen on the amateur sleuthing that's also going on.
We excavated enough soil to construct an Olympic-sized swimming pool to look for one set of human remains when we were told pretty much where they were. Now, to say there may be bodies on a particular location, but it could be covering several acres, is not a sensible proposition to take spades and forks out there and start digging. And we need to be very clear about what we're trying to do and keep that in mind and keep our feet on the ground.
While officers who are also involved do not believe that there will be any more breakthroughs on this case unless Rosemary West cooperates.
If she becomes an open book, obviously there's massive importance on going back, but if she still maintains the stance that she's got at the moment, there is little point in going to see her, because she has been totally and utterly disinterested and unhelpful throughout the inquiry, and if she maintains that stance, what is the point in going to see her?
The Thursday night, well, police arrive on a Thursday, and Rose is at home, she's watching television. And Stephen, their eldest son, is with her. and so's May, now the oldest surviving child. And they phoned Fred up, who's working some way away, not that far, 15 miles away, and say, you've got a mobile phone, you better come home, Dad. Oh, okay, I'll be home. The police are here. Rose is furious. Okay, well, 3.5 hours elapse before Fred gets home. We don't know where he went, although I believe, and I think a number of other people involved with the case believe, that he went to conceal some other bodies, but never mind. We'll never know for certain. When he eventually gets home, he's taken to the local police station and interrogated about where's Heather. Well, if you're digging up my garden, you better put it back. Heather's nowhere to be seen, she's gone, disappeared. Yes, okay, Fred, but no, I'm not having anything to do with it. You've got to put my garden back. Friday, he goes home on Thursday night, and he and Rose take their 2 new dogs for a walk. Now, no member of the family has ever seen Fred and Rose take their dogs for a walk before. Never. Anyway, they walk down Cromwell Street, and there's a park at the bottom. And they take the dogs for a walk in the park, and they come up with what I think was the scheme they hoped would work, which is that Fred would take the blame, and Rose would say, I didn't know anything about anything. I was pregnant all the time. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know their bodies were buried. I didn't know anything. So the following morning, when Fred goes back to the police station, he makes the first admission. I may have killed her, Heather. But as they continue digging, there's no sign of Heather. So he retracts the confession. They keep digging. He's adamant, no, she's a drug dealer, or she's in Dubai, or typical Fred. Endless stream of conversation, neuro-linguistic skill. It's only when they finally, and it's now he's been at the police station for 36 hours, and he finally finds, pouring with rain. It's a miserable, miserable day, and the police are digging up the garden of Cromwell Street. And they find not 1 human thigh bone, but 3. It's a memorable moment in the case when they go back to Fred and said, well, Fred, we found bones in the garden. Oh, really? Well, unless Heather's got 3 legs, there's more than 1 body. He said, oh, yes, it could be that girl Shirley who caused Rose such a lot of trouble. Eventually, it turned out, of course, there were 3 victims buried under the garden in Cromwell Street, and 6 more victims buried under the cellar, which had been the kids' playroom. It's difficult to imagine. Fred kept all the bodies because he regarded them as his trophies, his handiwork. He was immensely proud of them in his own distorted way, and lived in a world that he'd created for himself.
It was bedsit land, You'd see a girl there the one day, and there's mostly young women that were living in the flats, in the bedsits. So they were like here, 2 or 3 months they might stay, a couple of weeks here, gone, one, gone. So it was very hard. It was just like they moved on,
The West's victims came from far and wide. They were snared by a seemingly innocent couple in an ordinary car who would offer them a lift. The couple had already been convicted of a sexual assault on a former nanny who they'd picked up, bound with tape in a similar way to that found on the murder victims, and then subjected to a horrific attack, with Rose West taking a leading part. They even told a neighbour about picking up women together after she'd been babysitting for them.
One of the defining characteristics of a serial killer and a psychopath is to abuse power. And they crave power. They have an extraordinary hunger for power, and power over another human being. And they can get extremely frustrated when their sense of entitlement finds itself blocked, and it doesn't matter what they feel entitled to, status, acknowledgement, sex, whatever it is that they want, Human beings are simply obstacles in the way of that. So I think it's extraordinarily common for serial killers to feel an intense sense of frustration at when other human beings simply don't give them what they believe they're entitled to.
Fred, in the end, well, he hoped he would make. He hoped he'd be able to leave Cromwell Street to Rose, which is why they came up with this plot, that he would take the blame for everything and she would just say she didn't know anything. That way, she would keep Cromwell Street, even though he'd go to jail. And he was resigned to the fact that he would go to jail. But he also told the police where Anne McFall and Rena's bodies were buried, in the fields near his childhood home in Marshmarkle, and they began an enormous search, digging. So they dug up the garden in Cromwell Street, then they dig up the cellar, find 6 small bodies under the cellar floor. They're looking for Charmaine, so they go to 25 Midland Road and eventually find Charmaine's remains. And they dig up 2 fields near Marshmarkle. They find Rena West's body quite quickly, but it takes them nearly 8 weeks to find Anne McFall. They dig a hole the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool, about 6 feet deep, before they finally find the remains, which Fred had told them were there. That's how they found the bodies.
The police in Gloucester, searching 25 Cromwell Street, last night discovered yet a further set of human remains. They were found in the bathroom area on the ground floor, and they were taken to Cardiff University, where they will be examined, along with the remains that we've previously discovered.
Go on, go on. Fred was interviewed many, many times, and Fred had an agreement with Rose that if she stood by him, he would hold his hand up to murdering Heather, and he did, and then he had to hold his hand up to a few more, but immediately he did hold his hand up. Rose dropped him.
It was a harrowing hour for the 9 relatives who attended the inquest. Some were in tears as they listened to the horrifying evidence. A policewoman sitting next to them broke down and sobbed too.
This was the first time the couple had seen each other since Fred's February arrest. Reporters within the court today claim that prior to hearing the formal charges against them, Fred leaned towards his wife and gently placed his hand upon her shoulder. In response, Rose, having ignored her husband's presence, visibly winced in discomfort. Both were held on remand. Further details on the case will be unveiled in the coming few days.
Well, of course, Fred had long thought that he wasn't going to face the life sentence, which he knew was inevitable, and so decided, with typical cunning, to kill himself in prison. He did it on the 1st of January 1995.
Mr. West's death is undoubtedly an embarrassment for the prison management here. As a high-profile, high-category remand inmate, he should have been monitored constantly. But it'll take an investigation to discover whether his death was due to any lapse in prison security.
In her evidence, she described how as a vulnerable teenager she'd fallen for the lies of Frederick West, but they'd ended up leading separate lives. Shown photographs of some of the victims, she said she'd never seen any of them. And the cellar at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester was somewhere Frederick West often worked, but forbade her to enter. Frederick West committed suicide in jail 10 months ago.
And in a typically sly way, he endeared himself to the prison authorities while he was on remand at Winson Green. And he would do laundry for the other prisoners. And they'd bring him things to, mend this shirt or, and he was adept at it. And they would bring him bags of laundry and he'd do the mending. And he decided to make a noose, partly from the blankets around his bed, with the aid of the needles they'd given him. He created a noose, and above his cell door there was a mesh heating grill, and he looped the noose he'd made through the grill and put it around his neck. But he didn't take the chair. No, Fred was too shrewd for that. He didn't take the chair because when he kicked it away, it would clearly make a noise and someone might come. He stood on the bag of laundry, kicked the laundry bag away and hanged himself. His feet were about 9 inches off the floor, leaving Rose to face the music.
Rosemary West made her all-too-familiar journey to court again this morning. But today, for the first time, she was to speak directly to the jury. Shown photographs of 5 of the women she's accused of killing, Mrs. West said she'd never seen them before.
A psychologist once commented that if you want to get a man to commit violence, give him a knife or a gun. If you want a woman to commit violence, give her a social network. And there are differences in the way in which men and women are aggressive, and of course men are much more likely to physically harm other people, because they are physically stronger. I mean, women are the weaker sex. They're physically weaker. Their upper body strength is weaker. They are much less physically imposing and dominant than men are. So that's the first thing to say about female killing. But in terms of reputational damage, in terms of emotional violence, I think women are just as capable as men of that, and sometimes more so.
Then it was the turn of Rosemary West to walk the short distance from the dock into the witness box. In a soft, nervous voice, she began her evidence by saying she'd had her first sexual relationship at about the age of 14. She'd been raped twice by strangers and abandoned by her mother. She said that Frederick West had promised to love and care for her. Because she was so young, she'd fallen for his lies.
I think it's fair to assume there's a correlation between sexual abuse as a child and sometimes a kind of hypersexuality in adulthood, because of course children who are the subject of violent or sexual abuse are, their potential for hypersexualization or criminality later in life is of course much higher, because they lack the secure boundaries and the empathetic relationships really with caregivers that a healthy, normal functioning adult will go through. So there's clearly a link.
She'd learned from her father. He'd been her guru, sexual guru. She'd learned all this. She'd outgrown her father to the manipulator, to pass on to Fred, learned from Fred, outgrown him, and she was done with him. This is the chance to get rid of him. She just dropped him and she never spoke to him again.
Before leaving court, Rosemary West said she and her husband literally led separate lives. He did what he wanted to do, she said. Mrs. West will be cross-examined by the prosecution tomorrow.
Violence and serial killing is not the preserve of men. Of course, men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. Maybe 85–90% of all serial killers are male. But females are capable of committing atrocious crimes.
She was convicted of 10 murders, including Charmaine. Though, of course, she couldn't be convicted of Anne McFall or Rena. She is the most prolific female serial killer in British legal history.
In October 1996, number 25 Cromwell Street was demolished. Now another address in suburban Britain emerges with its own horror. And just like the West's home, its history will never be truly erased.